doubled pawns get a bad rap. I'm going to take my 29 years of chess experience to set the record straight, the most important pawn concepts to understand for both beginners and advanced players. They are pretty bad, okay? But we know that, we've heard that, let's break down exactly why that is the case. A great move, which is always a great way to start, but it also starts with my opponent going for a sacrifice, giving up a piece for 2 pawns and getting a big attack, pushing my king backwards, which is also very, very fun. And what this transpires into is a great example of how weak doubled pawns can really be. Let's see what happens. Without this cool tactic to double attack the knight and counter attack here, I really think I would have been busted. And so I was able to move forward and I centralized my knight. And this move from h5 to h6 is really just asking this pawn, hey, where are you going? Now you're not even connected to your other pawns. You don't have support. And so right here, I'm able to completely annihilate my opponent's pawns. Let's see how that works. I take. He has doubled pawns. We know those are bad. I take, and he has doubled pawns again. And so now my opponent has doubled pawns here, doubled pawns here, doubled pawns here. This is one of the worst pawn structures you can get. I offer a queen trade because I know I could win this endgame. My opponent pushes forward. I'm going to bring my rook over, target this pawn weakness that's going to be even weaker now that he's on h7. He moves forward, and I don't even mind undoubling those pawns because this pawn is falling. I'm going to go up even more material, and this trade is forced. So now it's just time to clean up these pawns. Let me go ahead and do that as quickly as I can. My opponent has no plans here. I slowly move my pawns forward, get my king safe, and it's just over. But I want to go back really quick and give a little bit more context. In pawn rankings, I had backwards pawns as a third most important concept to understand. These pawns are doubled, but they're also a backwards pawn to this pawn right here. And so I view this as almost a bigger weakness than the doubled pawns. These pawns here are isolated pawns, and I'm going to argue that isolated pawns are actually more important than doubled pawns. You can see it right here on the list for both beginner and advanced players, and we're going to get to that number one most important thing in this very next game. Now, this game right here is both a triumph and a tragedy. You're going to see what I mean by that in just a moment. But right here, I voluntarily accept doubled pawns. But there's a couple things I got going on for me. These doubled pawns are central pawns. They're right in the middle of the board, so they're exerting some influence. They're also connected to this other pawn, and so my central control with this pawn, little nugget right in the middle is very good. And additionally, these pawns are mobile. They're able to move forward, and we're going to see that's very critical in this game. So I castle, I start pushing forward to further expand in the center, and as I go, I'm pushing. We see that I'm the only one here with an open file, so I'm going to be able to get my rook over to the C file and exert some pressure. This A4 move I play restricts my opponent's ability to play B3. Restricting your opponent's pawn mobility, that's going to become important. And so right here, he pushes forward. He's making it more difficult for me to execute this E5 move. While it does restrict my E6 pawn, it restricts his E3 pawn. And I have this D6 pawn to support my attack along with my knight. He doesn't have anything to support this push. And so his pawns are going to become even more static. And so I push B5. And that completely locks this pawn push as well. So my opponent is running out of pawn moves. And I move right here, making it look like I'm giving up the pawn here on b4, but it is a little bit risky to do that. Let's say that the opponent does take here. A continuation might look something like this, where now I'm forking these 2 pawns. I'm going to get one of these 2, and then this pawn right here on c3 is a backwards pawn, which we're going to be able to pile up on. And then in addition to that, I mean, you just have to be a lunatic to take that pawn without even calculating all that stuff. Instead of that, he just pushes his knight forward. I now protect that pawn. I push his knight back, and I get in. I am forking these two pawns. They are not able to do anything. One of them is going to fall. I move back here. I push his queen back, offer a queen trade. And now is when I start going astray. So I was able to get my rook over to attack c3. But like we mentioned, his pawns aren't able to do anything at all. What I could do is I could waste a ton of time, improve all of my pieces, move my queen over here, move my rook up here to triple up, barrel down on this, while my knight is preventing it from moving forward, still exerting pressure on both of these pawns. But instead of all that, really good stuff, I get this brilliant idea. Okay, let me move my knight more forward, not realizing that the knight here, while it is further forward, it doesn't attack those key squares. It doesn't prevent this pawn push. It doesn't attack both of these pawns. It actually doesn't do much of anything. And as we're about to see, the computer agrees with that assessment. So now I play g5, and I'm trying to make a second set of weaknesses. So I've already got a bunch of weaknesses here over on the queen side, like I've mentioned. If I'm able to push forward and create weaknesses also on the king side, wherever that happens to be, that could be really good for me, because now my opponent's defending both sides of the board. However, in this particular case, the weaknesses are so strong on the queen side, and what I end up doing, especially in this set of moves, is I give my opponent ability to get back into the game. What we've been mentioning is his pawns have been immobile this whole game. This whole sequence where we trade pawns and I move off of f5 gives him the ability, after he moves his knight, of course, to push forward e5 and really start putting pressure onto me. Now, the computer gives us an inaccuracy because it's saying, okay, cool, well, you should have played your rook here first to prepare that move, but whatever. This is also really good for my opponent. I push forward here. There's too many question marks going on in this game, and this game immediately falls apart for me, and you could see my opponent just finishing it off in style. Got to love it. Nice game to him. When you listen to commentators on live chess, I'm talking the top commentators, grandmasters, Yasser, Robert Hess, Anish Giri. My next video is about Anish Giri, by the way, to see them all talk about the same thing that I only loosely understand, and that is pawn mobility. That's going to take you from the level I'm at right now up to master and grandmaster level. That's why I have it as my number one contest and the number one thing I'm working on right now to better understand. Okay, so let's wrap it up and pull together these concepts. The thing I love about chess is that it can be a big back and forth game. My opponent voluntarily accepts doubled pawns here. They're central pawns. I don't hate it at all. We move forward, and now he captures on e4, which I actually really don't like, because now he has voluntarily accepted isolated and doubled pawns, which I really, really don't get. As we move forward here, I push here. This is a weakening move. There's a lot of weak squares here now on the dark squares, so I don't particularly like it. I think I'm probably over-focusing on, hey, if I can keep these isolated pawns not moving forward, I should be able to eventually collect them. You see here right away I'm able to get one, but I blunder this fork, and so now I'm actually down a bit of material. I'm down one pawn for the exchange. So let's see what happens here. As I move back here, I'm actually giving up this knight for free. If you find the right move, I'll give you 1 second to do that. And it is actually this e5 move. I've got nowhere to go. I've got nothing to do. My opponent, instead of that, he plays c5, and now I have this miracle defense where I capture here, and if he recaptures, I get his bishop, so he moves over, I capture that, and we get this crazy, crazy trade-off, and now I am pushing my queenside pawns. I've got I guess you could call it a 4-on-1, maybe a 3-on-1 if you consider that this pawn is defending the d pawn, And so if you've got an advantage on one side of the board, you want to push it. So my advantage is my queenside pawns. So let me see what I can do to get them moving forward. He still has that pawn weakness on e6, so I could potentially try to take advantage of that. I am able to do so, and I'm moving forward. I capture here, and I'm simplifying down, and now it's just too late. My queenside pawns are going to win me that game, and it's, I don't know, 15 moves later, able to make it happen. And one other concept I want to introduce is a concept of pawn islands. In this position right here, my opponent has 1 pawn island, 2 pawn islands, let's call it 3 pawn islands right here, where the pawns are able to be connected to each other. There's no open files, so an open file, this is an open file. There's no white pawns on it. There's no white pawns on this one. Those are both open files, as of course is this one. So he has 3 pawn islands. Conversely, on my side, my only open files are actually the H and G file, and so I only have 1 pawn island. If you have fewer pawn islands, that's going to be easier for you, and a lot of times it indicates whether your opponent has isolated pawns, double pawns, that kind of thing. And so that's why for beginners, I have this as the most important concept to understand related to pawns. Keep your pawns together, keep them supporting each other, and you're going to do better. For advanced players, I have this way further down the list because there's so many other things, so many other weaknesses to exploit. Next week, I dive into the match between Giri and Abasov, which impacts the World Championship race. So please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you around soon.